Hey, welcome back to Bridal Sewing Techniques, and today we're going to talk about how to make a gown strapless. Are you someone who has experience with a mix of sewing but is looking to get into the bridal sewing niche? This channel is for you. Hit subscribe to become a part of the community. So here is a before and after picture of a gown that I made strapless. And what I wanted to do today is, in high BST fashion, is take a deep dive into converting gowns, what we can and cannot do in terms of making a gown strapless, and also just getting a better understanding of how a gown is supported. The reason why I do these deep dives with you guys is because I don't want to just give you one little tutorial because that's endless. There could be millions of tutorials, but I want to give you a foundational understanding of what's going on in whatever subject it is that I'm doing the video on. So today, when we talk about how do we make a gown strapless, we're actually talking about how do we make a gown supportive in a different way. So let's first go through some sketches and I'll explain the different ways to make a gown secure on a form. And then after we go through those, we'll get into the part of watching the videos of me actually doing this alteration where you can see all the details of this specific alteration. And then after that, I have a little tip that one of our BST besties sent in about how to make the razor more comfortable when you're using the razor instead of a seam ripper. So here is a sketch illustrating the obvious. A gown with straps is held up by the shoulders just like a coat hanger, so gravity can pull down and everything's fine. Well, if you remove the straps and gravity pulls down, the dress, well, it could fall off, but in this case, it's just a little wrinkly and baggy and the sweetheart has tipped forward. So this is why we put boning in here. You can see the little bones that I sketched in there. We put boning in the bodice so that that can notch at the waist and lock on the hips. And then with that squeeze, you have the boning that is rising vertically above the waist that's going up to the top of the bodice. That's holding the bodice up for you. So basically the gown is being supported by the hips and the top part of the gown is being suspended by the boning. Now, here's a little sketch I showed from the side view. You can see the first line shows at the waist. The second line shows where it locks at the hips. This is the traditional way that a strapless gown has been supported. But now, as you know, we're getting a lot of the very low back, plunging back, strapless gowns. Things that basically defy gravity. So I'm changing the sketch to reflect that, and I'm going to show you the problem that you have. Oh no! When you remove the back and the straps, you don't have any backward pull. You also don't have any pull that is really just locking all the way around that waist. And that's where the problems come from. So when a bride comes in and says, "Can you make my gown strapless?" the answer is usually yes, but only if the back rises up at least to the waist, or if there's some other way that we can secure the gown. So let's look at a sketch of our three main choices in securing a gown. This is, of course, outside of the realm of adhesives, meaning fashion tape, physical therapy tape, or otherwise. All right, so dress A, where is that support coming from to hold the gown to the frame? Right where those blush colored arrows are, this is the backward pull that I was talking about. Now with this gown, it can be a little problematic. This is a popular design right now. You're going to have a hard time not getting a little bit of a back roll squishing out around that band because the entire dress is being supported just by that band. So even in a girl who's quite thin and does not normally have a little fluff going on back there, she might get a little bit of a roll there. So be careful about that. Dress B, of course, is the traditional strapped gown, and I drew it with a low back so you can see that the plunge of the back is not really affecting the security of the gown because, like I said before, it's pretty much like it's hanging on a coat hanger. Everything's going on at the shoulders. And for gown C, this is how you have a strapless with the boning. That again, the gown is notched at the waist. It's very snug at the waist so that it locks on the hip. And what I mean by that is the waist of the gown can't slip down past the hips because the waist is smaller. So it's very important when you get some slippage in a strapless gown, it's important to know that the problem is not that the bodice needs to come back. A lot of people think it's time to tip the bodice back. No, when the gown is slipping down, that means you need to notch the waist a little bit tighter and really get that boning locked on the hips. So it may even be that the girl, the bride has a longer waist than the gown, and you need to extend the boning to lock on the hips. But that's the direction that you need to be thinking in. So for the example that we are doing today, we are taking a gown that has spaghetti straps, and we're going to remove them. And this gown has no boning, as you can see. You can just see how pliable it is. It just moves around freely. That would be a big problem. It also has a little bit lower back on it. So this gown would not be able to sustain itself as it is without severe bunching or slipping or something. So we're also going to put plenty of boning in this gown. And of course, the obvious is I would make sure that this gown fits her, but this video is focusing on removing the straps and what needs to be done to replace the support of the straps. So here I am using the razor to peel away the lace. And don't forget, hang in there. At the end of the video, I have a little tip from our BST bestie, Teresa, wrote in. She emailed me to say that she's got a little hack to make that razor a little more comfortable, guys. So I'll be sharing that with you. But basically, I'm just breaking the threads. And remember the rule with razor usage to always point the blade of the razor toward the lesser important fabric, okay? Every fabric's important. Yes, I know. Please do not burn the house down in the comments, okay? But every layer is important, but some layers are more important than others. So you want to make sure that the blade is facing toward the least important layer or the layer that is the most repairable. In this case, that would have been the shell fabric, not the lace. So if ever I was getting in a really tight spot, I would tend to angle the razor a little more toward the shell fabric because it's going to be cut off here in a minute, or at least tucked inside. So I've got this cleared away, and I'm tilting the lace out of the way, and I just basted it with a really big stitch. And now I'm going to introduce a little more contrast here. I know it's hard to see. My hands are in the way, but you know, I got to do what I got to do to get this thing apart. This is the strap in the back, and they just kind of had it tacked to the inside of the dress with, you know, 5 or 6 whip stitches kind of thing. Nothing major. But I just removed that, and then I'm just going to go ahead and just take that off at the quick right there. Cast them to the side. And let's go ahead and start on the other side. This is the back of the other side. Gonna separate things here. Sorry, I'm out of frame. My priority is my bride after all. So I try to just set up the tripod and sew and then deal with the fallout later. So I'm sorry if it gets out of view every now and then. If you had more questions about using the razor, don't forget I have a whole video on it, and I will link to it in the description below. And here we go, separating the lace once again. This lace actually was not tacked on too awfully tight. It was not difficult to remove. It wasn't, you know, anything particularly scary about potential gown damage or anything. Sometimes it can get, the tension is so tight on the stitching that you can't hardly separate the two without damage, and that's really sad when it's like that. But as you can see, this comes off fairly cleanly. I'm going to baste this down again out of the way. Now, when I do this big stitch, I'm not going to dive very deep with my needle. I'm going to make sure I only go through that top outer layer, that shell layer, to tack the lace overlay down. You don't want to scoop deep, super deep and grab the lining or something else in there to where once you get to the inside of the gown, your tack is hindering you from gaining access to what you need. So we've got that all set up and ready to go. There you can see in detail how I've taken it apart. Nothing terrible has happened. You don't have to be scared. I know it can be a little scary when you first start getting into bridal. Am I destroying things? No, everything at this point is fairly reversible. I did cut her strap off at the peak there of the bodice up front. Typically you would, if you wanted to be more careful, if she wanted it to be reversible or wasn't 100% sure, I could have opened the top there and pulled the strap allowance out of there and done that. But this bride was adamant. These are going in the trash kind of thing. So I wasn't too concerned. But a good rule of thumb though, when you're doing alterations, is to make sure the way you do things is reversible if need be, whenever you can. And I know with hems often that's impossible, but with most alterations it's possible. So I'm just getting underneath these stitches and breaking the stitches every 2 or 3 stitches just to get all of these loose so that we can, when we go to the middle through the layers, when we get to the in-between layers, we have complete access. We may still have to cut away a little bit to get to it, to get it completely flatly reversed from the inside, but we've done most of the work on the outside. It's just easier to see to do it this way. All right, so I did have someone leave a request that when I flip the dress wrong side out, to not cut that part out. I guess they're wondering if they're taking too long or are they doing it right. So basically what I do is I put my hand up through the different layers until I can find that raw seam of where the bodice is attached to the skirt. That's what I look for. And I keep putting my hands up through the layers. And if I can't find it, then here I flip it wrong side out and I find this seam that they made a little vent for us that's been sewn up on the outside instead of the inside. It was a little different. And that's an indicator to us that the manufacturer is saying, hey, this way, go through here to get to the inside of the dress where we can do our work. So that's how this gown was set up. Some gowns are not that way. Some gowns don't have one seam that was sewn from the outside like that. And you just open up your favored seam in the skirt and find a way there. And oh, there's a puppet. Hello, BST besties. How are you? Just inserting a little bit of crazy here. We are having some merch coming up, and I'll let you guys know on my website and on here when we do have merch. One of my favorite things says all of the sewing without the snobbery. As you know, we don't take to snobbery very well around here. We just want to have a good time and really understand the technicalities of why we're doing what we're doing so that we can think outside of the box and solve problems in alterations that happen in the future that there's not a video about and you're there alone in your sewing studio. And what do? Well, I use my understanding of the way these gowns work, and I come up with a creative way to solve this problem. So that's kind of our angle, and we're all super friendly and we're not afraid to laugh at mistakes, and I'm not going to edit out my mistakes. So if I sew something on backwards, you guys get to look at it and laugh with me, because I don't know about you, but I don't like sewing tutorials that are all pretty perfect, as I call them. I'm still just taking this dress apart. But I don't care for the sewing tutorials that are unrealistically perfect. I do my sewing in a sewing studio, not a video studio, not a production studio. And I do make mistakes. And I think that's great for you guys to see it because it helps build up your confidence. So you don't feel alone, when it's 1 o'clock in the morning and you're alone in your sewing studio and you're sewing that sleeve in for the third time because you keep sewing it in backwards. I want you to know that Brenda is there with you because she's done it 1,000 times before as well. So there you go. I just figured I would insert some talking content for you guys. We get a lot of complaints about music. So I don't know if you've noticed, I haven't used music for a very long time in my background. And I know people have different tastes. So I have invested in my audio. And I hope it's much cleaner for you guys. And I just figured I would just talk and teach during the downtimes. So what I'm doing is I'm marking where I'm going to shave this peak off. And I didn't do anything magical or super technical for that. I just kind of eyeballed it and said, yeah, I think this is where I'd like it, and spoke with the bride and figured out, how far does she want it to come down, that kind of thing. So I just sewed this with a nice rounded, soft angle that just reminds me of the top of a sweetheart gown. So there was no hand wringing involved, no nervousness. I just went from there to there kind of thing. Now, the first side is always the easiest. It's the second side that you have to mirror exactly, and that's when we're going to take just a little bit more time. Now, as I can see, when I lay this shell back over there, the peak is coming up too high. So I just kind of laid it over, eyeballed it. Yeah, I got to cut that corner off. Did it. And now I'm just going to loosely tack that in there, just like the manufacturer did. I'm going to knot that off. One of the important things about not getting too stressed out over bridal gown alterations is to prioritize things in your mind and to assess the risk of each alteration and know that there's more or less risk involved with each thing that you do. And so you can let kind of your nervous system, your anxiety levels, let them take a little break when you're doing something that isn't completely, no point of no return kind of thing, high risk. That doesn't mean that we're haphazard with the gowns, but you don't need to agonize over everything that you do with the gown or you're going to burn out. All right, so I'm just looking at the boning that's in here. There's a stick on the side seams, which was nice. That was nice that they did that to make it lay a little straight, but we're going to need much more than that. We're going to have to go from the top of the sweetheart down to the hip, the bride's hip, okay? And so I kind of looked at this dress on her and saw where this waist seam, where the bodice meets the skirt, I kind of figured out where is that in relation to where her hip is, so that when I look at this dress on the table, I know how far down to extend that boning. So I'm just going to lay this boning down, eyeball it, make sure it's going to be right, and cut a copy of it. So you've got 2 of each so that the boning that's going on the left side of the gown matches the right. You definitely want your boning to be symmetrical. Sometimes you get that shadow of almost like a corset underneath, and you want that to be nice and even if that happens. There's my stoppers, the muslin stoppers I keep in a little Tupperware box right behind my machine. And this is how I finish off the boning sticks so that the plastic stays don't come out through the end. And I just kind of sew them, just cap them and sew them. And everybody has different ways of doing this. I just prefer this because it's cheap, it's low profile. I don't like anything that's going to add too much bulk or may do poorly over time. I try to work with heirloom quality as often as I can. Some brides, of course, um, just to cut corners, want you to use some type of adhesives, iron-ons or otherwise at some phase of the sewing. And sometimes I do use that for stabilizing, but I do want everything to be as heirloom quality um, as her budget will allow. And that's how I settled on muslin. All right, so now I'm going to do the other ends, and I just wanted to show you how I sew a series of bones together. When I'm done, it's kind of funny they're called bones, right? Because when I'm done, it kind of reminds you of a rib cage. But I just sew them together in a series like this instead of cutting my threads between each one and cleaning them up all perfect, so that when I'm done, I have this cluster of bones or boning. I do link to the type of products that I use on my website. You can always go there. There's information in the description below, but that'll tell you, what my favorite kind of boning is. I only use one type of sew through boning, and that kind of information, you can always find it on there. If you're looking on my website for a certain product you see me using and it's not on there, just leave a comment down below or email me, and I will make sure to add it to there if I can. All right, so I am going to tack this boning down at the top very securely. I'm only tacking it to the seam allowance. I'm not going all the way through. It's nice when you have this wide seam allowance on the princess seams. It makes it so much easier to add boning to these gowns, as opposed to having just, a eighth of an inch seam allowance or something that they have on some of the very light dresses that weren't made to be altered. So I'm really going to focus on the start of the bone and the end of the bone. And then all the way down the seam, you're going to see I'm going to do a hand tack that kind of zigzags back and forth. And I definitely want to make sure that the boning is secured all the way down. So that's why I crisscross over it. And sometimes I'm going to send my needle through it a little bit. That way you don't get any shaky Jake stuff going on where it's slipping around and it's acting like it's only tacked down at the top and the bottom. We want it to be securely tacked all the way down. You can see how I went through the boning for that one stitch. You don't have to do it every time because you do want to take care of your joints. That would wear your hands out. But you're going to do it more often in some of the curvier parts, just to really make sure that they are secure. Now the bones in my fingers, they are starting to turn. Some of you might be having that go on as well, just from putting in those long hours of sewing. I've been sewing for, well over 20 years now. And my bones are starting to kind of rotate out from the pressure of the needle. And when I spoke to my family physician about it, here's an up close of the way I tacked it, where I tacked it, and then this crisscross going down. And you can see all those little angles that the seam allowances don't perfectly line up. That's okay. That's how the inside of these gowns are. So this is how it's securely tacked. Well, anyways, back to my doctor. She's a sweetheart. But I talked to her about my bones turning and what should I do? Oh me, oh my. And she said use tools more. So as you know, my hands are my tools. But I really should, if I'm going to be sewing in a lot of boning, particularly through a more resistant fabric. This fabric is not very resistant, but some of them are a little more dense and they're harder to sew through. If I'm going to be doing that a lot one day, then I need to be using my little pliers for that to push it through. So that's just a good idea for you if your hands are aching. I have a video on that, how to use pliers when you're sewing. And I also have a video on a hand soak that I love. So, if it's bridal season, you're coming home late at night and your hands are aching, and in the morning when you wake up, your hands are swollen and numb like mine are very often. There is a very nice hand soak that it really helps. You think it's just a little, indulgent little spa moment or something, and it's all in your head. No, it really, really helps. So I'll link to that down below also. I know most of you have not seen that video because it doesn't have a lot of views on it. YouTube hasn't really promoted it very much. So definitely you can always go to my channel homepage here on YouTube and go through my history of all of my uploads and go through my playlists. And I bet you'll find some videos in there that you've not seen before. So here I'm anchoring it just a little extra right there at that seam allowance because that's a strong place for this dress. It's got kind of a canvas backing on that lining. And here I'm using some clear hypo cement and I'm only touching it to the knots. I'm not damaging the fabric in any way, but this is going to keep my knots from coming undone. The reason why I want to really anchor this there at the seam allowance is because below that, it's really just the lining of the skirt and it's not super thick fabric. So I'm not going to put too much of a burden on that fabric. I'm going to go ahead, of course, and still sew it to the boning, but I'm not going to expect it to stabilize things quite as much as that waist seam will. Because remember, the waist seam is going to really have more tension on it. It's going to be locked down. So with this, look at that. I have some access to it where I can machine sew for a few minutes. So that's nice. So I'm really going to anchor the bottom of this boning down with machine sewing. And yes, sometimes you feel like you're sewing in the bottom of a nest. It's hard to get to. Sometimes you can't get to it. Just do what you can. And of course, using the skinny little invisible zipper foot that I have on, I think it's the left foot. It's kind of hard to tell here, but using this skinny little foot is going to help things too. I don't have a big clunky foot on there. Now to sew through boning, I'm going to be using usually at least a size 14 needle. And I would like for that needle to be fresh. And that's going to help it find its way between the stays of the boning. I do hope to have a video coming up soon about the different types of boning and the way we use them, because I haven't gone into that much yet. If you have any questions about that, leave that in the comments down below, and I'll make sure to include it in my boning video. Also, take a moment to hit the bell if you've already subscribed. If you haven't subscribed, oh my goodness, what are you waiting on? Hit subscribe. But if you have subscribed, hit the bell and you'll be notified when I upload. Someday I would love to get organized enough to have a perfect upload schedule and always stick to it. But right now I'm just not at that point. These videos take a long time to produce and I do still run a sewing shop. So I'm just doing my best here. Also, as you watch this video, please give me the thumbs up. Hit that like button. It helps a lot. It's going to help YouTube to show you the videos that you're more likely to love. And it's also going to help promote my video. They'll show my video to more people and you'll be helping me to grow this community. And it only takes a second and costs you nothing. So thank you so much for doing that, guys. You're so supportive of me. All right, so we're going to do this again. We're going to do it on the side seam. Now this side seam has enough seam allowance where I get to use the machine again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay the dress to the left of the presser foot, and to the right, all that's going to be under there is my seam allowance of the right side kind of flipped out. That's it. So I'm not sewing it to the actual lining of the dress that would be near, touching the body. This is just the seam allowance that I'm sewing to. So I'm going to do that to the right and to the left, and then I'm going to tack it down wherever necessary. Now, how you sew this in is going to be different for just about every dress. It just depends on the way the dress was put together. Some of them you can alter just like a straight line down the sides, the way that they sewed the bodice to the skirt. And then others of them, you've got that little jump in there and you can't sew straight down. Some of them you can use the machine for part of it and hand sew for another part. Or some of it, you can use the machine for all of it. That's the kind we like, right? All right, so here's the other side. And as I showed you before, remember there was a stick of boning on the outer layer, the shell layer, that was just going to make it lay straight. I was adding boning to the lining layer, and that's going to help make that lining layer supportive. So that, just in case you were wondering, why did she add boning when it was already boning there? Well, I put it on a different layer. The more support a gown needs, the more bones you need. And also, you may want to introduce the bones to just more than one layer. And then, of course, you want to tether these layers together with a chain tack. I do have a video on that. And then as you can see here, I undid that basting stitch and I flipped this lace back up. The bride loves this botanical edge, and I'm crazy about it too. I love the vines overlaying the edge. Half the brides are going to tell you to just kind of roll that in and give her a clean edge, or sew it into that edge when you were making that new edge. You could have tucked it down between the layers, between the shell and the lining, and really had a finished straight edge there, clean edge. But she loves the botanical. So you can see what it would look like if it was folded back. So yeah, that's what we decided on. And I was just tacking it down, again, making sure not to stitch too deep. Now let's take this over to the ironing table, because this, as you know, is where all the action happens. We can sew perfectly all day long, but it's still going to look like a rumply mess until we put it on the ironing table and give it a good hard press. And then even press down with your tailor's clapper and really compact things if there's still some loft in there. You just want all of these lace pieces to lay flush. You don't want them sprigging out on her. So I like to use the tailor's ham, that round edge, to kind of give you the shape of the bust in there, so that as we press it, we're really training the dress to lay just like it would on our bride. And I use a nice low setting on my iron. Somebody was worried about a fire the other day. It's really, it's nylon or below, because I don't want to melt any tulle or sequins. So that's why I was able to press over the sequins. It's just the steam that's hot. The sole plate's not that hot. So here's our after picture on our bride. Isn't she lovely? And she also feels very secure. And now you guys know how to approach the subject of security with your brides. All right, let's look at this tip on your razor and how to make it more comfortable. Custom razor cushions. Yes, you heard it here from our BST bestie, Teresa. She has the suggestion of wrapping the back end. This is not the blade end, but wrap the back end in some cushion tape or some physical therapy tape. Now, she sent me the actual brand that she uses, and I am familiar with it, but I'm kind of nervous about recommending a specific brand because there's so many latex allergies and adhesive allergies out there. I use a lot of caution with that. Even when I suggest taping to my brides for support, I just really, really caution them. And so I caution you to make sure you use a product that you know you're not allergic to. I am very allergic to latex and have an adhesive allergy. My skin will literally blister up and come off. So I have to be cautious, and I want you to be cautious too. But find a product that you're not allergic to, wrap that back end of the razor in it. And now you'll be much more comfortable as you rip through those seams on all your sewing projects. Thanks, Teresa. And if anyone else has any suggestions or hints or tips or tricks, you can leave them in the comments below or you can email them to me and I'd be happy to share them. Thank you so much for contributing to the community. Don't forget to hit the like button. Here's my channel trailer. I know what you're looking for. You've been sewing for years, but you want to get into full-time bridal sewing. But there's something missing. You're missing the backroom secrets, the industry tips and tricks. The tools, the sources, the techniques that give you the speed and the accuracy that the industry demands. You have found it.